The crowd cheered louder. She smiled, until 6 men in black suits shoved through the celebrating supporters and formed a circle around the stranger she had just kissed. Every phone nearby slowly turned toward them. Someone whispered, "That's him." Her smile disappeared. She tried to apologize, but the man raised one hand, stopping his security before they could touch her. He didn't look angry. He looked intrigued. Why would one of the richest Korean businessmen in the world be sitting among ordinary football fans? Why did he protect the woman who had just embarrassed him in front of thousands? And why, after looking into her eyes for only a few seconds, did he quietly tell his bodyguard, "Find out who she is"? She walked away, believing she'd escaped the most embarrassing moment of her life. She had no idea she'd just stepped into the life of the man who would become her billionaire boss. 3 days later, the elevator doors opened. Their eyes met again. This time, there was nowhere to run. This version is tighter, more cinematic, and delivers stronger curiosity with fewer words. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. Olivia's breath caught somewhere between her chest and her throat. There he was, Jung-hoon, standing inside the mirrored car in a charcoal suit that fit him like it had been tailored from silence itself. His hands were folded behind his back. His eyes were already on her, as if he'd known exactly which door would open and exactly who would be standing on the other side of it. Neither of them moved. Then he stepped aside, holding the door with one hand. "After you." She didn't trust her legs to carry her forward, but she stepped in anyway, gripping the strap of her bag like it was the last solid thing left in her world. The doors closed. The elevator began its slow climb, floor by floor, and the silence between them pulled tighter than steel cable. She stared at the numbers. He studied her reflection in the mirrored wall. "You're the new hire," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir. Marketing division. Reporting to Ms. Nahe-rin." She turned, startled. "You know that?" "I know everyone who works for me." A pause, measured and unhurried. Eventually, another floor passed. The number blinked red above the door. "Mr. Seo, about the stadium." "Jung-hoon." "I'm sorry?" "You may call me Jung-hoon, given the circumstances." Heat rushed up her neck. "I would rather forget the circumstances, if it's all the same to you." Something flickered behind his eyes. Not anger, not amusement, something closer to a man encountering a puzzle that refused to solve the way he expected. "That may be difficult," he said quietly, "since I don't intend to." The doors opened on her floor before she could find an answer. She stepped out fast, too fast, and didn't look back until the doors had already sealed shut behind her. Only then did she let herself breathe. Orientation began an hour later in a glass-walled room on the 11th floor, where 20 new hires sat in silence, waiting for someone important enough to make the silence feel earned. Choi Eun-ji, the human resources director, moved through the room with the brisk warmth of someone who had done this 100 times and still meant every word. "You are joining one of the fastest-growing technology companies in Asia," she said. "Mr. Seo built this company from nothing after his father passed. He expects excellence. He also protects his people fiercely. Remember that." She paused at the front of the room, letting the words settle. "Most of you will never speak to him directly. That's not a criticism of you. It's simply the nature of a company this size. But every one of you was hired because someone believed you could earn that conversation eventually, if you wanted it badly enough." Olivia wrote nothing down. She was still hearing his voice in her head. "That may be difficult, since I don't intend to." Beside her, a sharp-featured woman in a fitted burgundy blazer, studied her with the particular attention of someone cataloging a threat. "You're the new girl under me," the woman said. "Nahirin, marketing manager." "Olivia, it's nice to meet you." Nahirin's eyes flicked toward the boardroom doors, then back to Olivia, lingering a beat too long. "You came in late this morning. Elevator trouble?" Olivia's stomach dropped. "No trouble. Just a long ride up." Nahirin smiled thinly and said nothing else, but the smile stayed with Olivia long after the woman had turned away. The first week gave her little room to think about anything else. Nahirin assigned her the smallest, most forgettable tasks on the floor, formatting reports nobody would read, proofreading press releases that had already gone through 3 rounds of edits. Olivia did every one of them without complaint, arriving before the sunrise crew and staying until the cleaning staff started their rounds. It was during one of those late nights, alone at her desk with a cold cup of coffee and a stack of quarterly reports, that she noticed the pattern nobody else seemed to be looking for: a gap between the company's public sponsorship spending and the actual reach it produced. Millions spent on logos stitched into jerseys nobody remembered by the following season, while local programs that could have used a fraction of that money folded quietly every year. She started sketching an alternative on the back of a printed spreadsheet just to see if the numbers could work. They did, better than she expected. She didn't tell Nahirin. She built the entire proposal in her own time, across 2 weeks of nights that bled into mornings, because some part of her had learned a long time ago that permission was a thing you were rarely given and almost always had to earn by simply doing the work first and asking questions later. That night, Olivia came home to the small apartment she shared with her closest friend, Amina, and dropped onto the couch like her bones had given up on her. "You survived day 1, Amina said, handing her a cup of tea. "Tell me everything." "I kissed my boss." Amina nearly dropped her own cup. "You..." "What?" "Not on purpose. It was the World Cup celebration. Everyone was crying and hugging strangers. I didn't know he wasn't wearing a suit. Amina, he was just a man in the crowd. And now he's your boss. Now he's my boss." Amina sat down slowly, staring at her friend like she was watching a slow-motion car crash she couldn't look away from. "Olivia, do you understand what kind of trouble that is?" "I know. Do you think so? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like the beginning of something you can't walk back from." Olivia laughed, but it came out thin. It was one kiss. It doesn't have to mean anything. She almost believed herself. She thought of her mother, Miriam, back home, still recovering from the surgery that had drained the family's savings. She thought of her younger brother, Ethan, halfway through university, on a scholarship that covered tuition, but nothing else. She thought of her father, David, who had worked himself into an early grave, believing that steady hands and an honest name were the only inheritance worth leaving behind. This job was not a stepping stone, it was the floor beneath her family's feet. She could not afford to let one reckless kiss become a headline. Her phone buzzed just before midnight. Ethan's name lit up the screen. "Hey, sis." His voice was careful, the way it always was when he needed something and hated needing it. "Sorry to call so late." "It's fine. What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, exactly. The engineering program added a lab fee this semester. $300, due Friday. I already picked up extra shifts at the bookstore, but I'll send it tomorrow." "Olivia, you don't have to. You're not quitting that program over $300, she said, harder than she meant to. Then, softer, "How's Mom?" "Tired. She won't admit it, but the new medication makes her dizzy in the mornings. A pause. She asks about you every day. Says the new job sounds like something Dad would have been proud of. Olivia closed her eyes. Tell her I'm fine. Tell her everything's going exactly the way it should. She hung up before her voice could betray how far that was from the whole truth. Amina, curled at the other end of the couch, watched her carefully. You're doing the thing again. What thing? The thing where you carry everyone else's weight and call it fine. Amina reached over and squeezed her hand. One day, Olivia, someone's going to have to carry yours. Olivia didn't answer. She only stared at the ceiling, thinking of her father's hands, rough, steady, always working, and the promise she'd made at his graveside that she would never let the people he loved go without again. Whatever this thing was with Jung-hoon, whatever strange gravity had pulled them into the same elevator, in the same building, in the same city, out of 8 million people, she couldn't let it cost her the one thing she'd spent her whole life building. She just wasn't sure yet whether it was already too late. Across the city, in a penthouse office that looked out over a skyline he had built half of, Jung-hoon stood at the window with a glass of water he hadn't touched. His best friend, Jung Tae-hyun, sprawled across the leather couch behind him, watching him with the amused patience of someone who had known him since they were children, throwing rocks into the Han River. You've been standing there for 11 minutes, Tae-hyun said. I timed it. I'm thinking about the woman from the stadium. Jung-hoon didn't answer, which was answer enough. You told Baek Sung-ho to find out who she was, Tae-hyun continued. And then it turns out she works for you, in your own building. That's not a coincidence, Jung-hoon. That's the universe writing a very unsubtle joke. It changes nothing, doesn't it? Jung-hoon finally turned. His face was calm, the way it always was, the way it had been trained to be since he was 19 years old and standing at his father's funeral in a suit 2 sizes too large, shaking hands with board members who were already calculating who would run the company now that the old man was gone. I don't do this, he said. I don't get distracted. I don't let things become complicated. You've never had to, Tae-hyun said, more gently now. Nobody's ever made you feel anything you couldn't control before. Jung-hoon said nothing, because there was nothing to say that wouldn't be an admission. His father had taken him to football matches every autumn before the illness took him, not as the son of a chairman, but as an anonymous face in a crowd of thousands, screaming for a team that owed them nothing and asked for nothing in return. It was the only place in the world where his father had ever looked completely, uncomplicatedly happy. He remembered one match in particular, the year before the diagnosis, when his father had turned to him mid-roar, eyes bright, and said, Out here, nobody asks what I own. They only ask who I cheer for. At 19, Jung-hoon hadn't understood what a rare kind of freedom that was. He understood it now, every year, a little more. After his father died, Jung-hoon kept going, alone. Every match, in every city his business happened to bring him to, he found a seat among strangers and let himself disappear for 90 minutes. Nobody in the company knew. Not the board, not even Tae-hyun, not fully. You know Lee Hyun-sok is going to bring up the Song Alliance again at the next board session, Tae-hyun said carefully, watching his friend's back. He's been quietly courting director Song for over a year. A merger, sealed with a marriage. It solves half his liquidity concerns and gives him a family name attached to yours. I haven't agreed to anything. You haven't said no either. I've been busy not caring, Jung-hoon said flatly. There's a difference. There won't be, for much longer. He's already floating the idea to the board like it's decided. Tae-hyun sat forward. I'm not telling you to marry for love, Jung-hoon. I'm telling you that if you don't decide what you want soon, someone else is going to decide it for you. Someone always has, since your father died. Jung-hoon didn't answer that either, until a woman he had never met wrapped her arms around him in the 90th minute of the most important match of the year, and for the first time since his father died, he had felt something crack open in his chest that he didn't know how to close again. The following weeks moved with deceptive calm. Olivia buried herself in work, arriving early, leaving late, determined to make herself invisible to everyone except the numbers on her spreadsheets. She was assigned a modest project, a proposal for a youth sports outreach initiative, meant to improve the company's public image after a string of quiet controversies nobody explained to her. She poured herself into it the way she poured herself into everything, without permission to fail. Her proposal didn't stay quiet for long. It landed, through channels she didn't fully understand, on the desk of the chief financial officer, Park Do-hyun, who brought it to a Tuesday leadership meeting with visible enthusiasm. "This is the most thoughtful community initiative I've seen from marketing in 2 years," he said, sliding the folder across the table. "It's not just good PR, the budget model is sound. Whoever wrote this understands where our money actually goes." Jung-hoon, seated at the head of the table, opened the folder and read the name at the bottom. Olivia. He kept his expression perfectly still. "Bring her in," he said. "I want to hear the pitch directly." Na-hye-rin's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She had submitted the initiative under her own name in the summary email, and now the founder himself wanted to hear it from someone else entirely. "Of course, sir," she said, and the smile she gave didn't reach anywhere near her eyes. Olivia stood in front of the executive boardroom 20 minutes later, hands trembling slightly around the edges of her tablet, doing everything in her power not to look at the man seated at the head of the table. "The initiative partners with underfunded youth football programs across 3 cities, she said, her voice steadying as she found her rhythm. "Not as a marketing stunt, as a genuine investment. Kids don't need another logo on a jersey. They need equipment, transportation, and coaches who show up." "And the return on investment?" asked Han Ji-soo, the legal advisor, not unkindly. "The return is trust," Olivia said. "You can't buy that with an advertising budget. You can only earn it by actually caring and then letting people see that you cared before you ever needed them to notice." Park Do-hyun leaned forward, tapping the folder. "The budget breakdown is conservative. Almost too conservative. Why not ask for more?" "Because asking for more than we need is how trust gets spent before it's even earned," Olivia said. "I'd rather underpromise and hand you back unused funds than force this board to explain an overrun to shareholders." A ripple of quiet approval moved around the table. "You've clearly thought about this from every angle," Han Ji-soo said. "Most proposals this board sees are built to impress us. Yours reads like it was built to actually work." "With respect," Na-hye-rin cut in smoothly, "the marketing division submitted this concept as a team effort. I'd hate for credit to be misplaced." Olivia felt the floor shift slightly beneath the comment, but said nothing. Jung-hoon's eyes moved from Na-hye-rin to the folder, then to the signature at the bottom of every page. The strategy document, the budget model, and the pilot timeline are written in a single, consistent hand, he said evenly. "I'm not interested in reassigning credit. I'm interested in the results. Whoever can deliver this leads it." Silence settled over the table. Then Jung-hoon spoke, and every head turned toward him. "Approved," he said. "Full funding. She leads it personally, reporting directly to this board." Nahe-rin's knuckles whitened around her pen. Only one man in the room did not look pleased at all. Lee Hyun-seok, seated near the far end of the table, arms crossed, his expression unreadable in the particular way of men who had spent decades learning to hide exactly what they were thinking. He had spent 3 years quietly steering vendor contracts through shell companies that paid him more than his salary reflected. An outreach initiative meant new auditors, new scrutiny, new eyes on budgets he had carefully kept dim. He did not like new eyes. He especially did not like new eyes that the founder himself seemed determined to protect. Nahe-rin found him in his office that evening, ostensibly to discuss the initiative's marketing rollout. She closed the door behind her before speaking. "You saw how he looked at her in there," she said. "That wasn't a founder defending a good proposal. That was something else." "I noticed." Lee Hyun-seok didn't look up from his tablet. "You seem invested in the distinction." "I built that pitch's framework months ago." She repackaged it and walked away with the credit and his attention. Her voice was carefully controlled, but something raw moved underneath it. "I'm simply pointing out that this arrangement could become a liability for the company, for the song alliance you've been arranging." Lee Hyun-seok finally looked up, studying her with the mild interest of a man recalculating how useful a person might be to him. "Keep your eyes open," he said. "If anything develops between them that isn't strictly professional, I would want to know immediately. And if it does, then we'll discover exactly how much a founder is willing to sacrifice for a girl from nowhere with no name to protect her." He returned to his tablet, dismissing her. "Everyone has a price they don't know about yet, Ms. Na. I've built a career on finding it before they do." That evening, a storm rolled in over the city, and with it, a citywide power failure that swallowed 3 entire districts in darkness. The office building lost power just after 8 o'clock. Emergency lighting flickered on along the corridors, dim and orange, casting long shadows across empty desks. Olivia was still in the conference room, papers scattered across the table, when the lights died. She heard footsteps in the hallway. A voice. "Still here?" Jung-hoon stood in the doorway, lit only by the amber glow of the emergency lights. His tie loosened, his usual composure slightly undone by the dark. "I lost track of time," she admitted. "I didn't realize everyone else had already left. The building runs on backup generators for the elevators. Everything else waits for the city." He stepped inside, careful, unhurried. "You should go home. It isn't safe to be alone here." "I'm not alone. You're here." The words left her mouth before she could stop them, and she immediately wished she could pull them back out of the air. But he didn't look away. If anything, something in his posture eased, like a held breath finally released. "May I sit?" he asked. "It's your building. It's your table tonight." She almost smiled despite herself, and gestured to the chair across from her. They sat in the half-dark for a long moment, the storm rattling faintly against the windows. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Why were you there? At the match? Sitting with everyone else? Not," she gestured vaguely, "not up in some private box." He was quiet for a moment, longer than the question seemed to require. "My father used to take me," he said, "every year, before he got sick. He never sat in the boxes either. He said you couldn't feel anything real from behind glass." Was he right? He was right about most things. A faint, almost imperceptible smile. "It's one of the few habits of his I kept." "I'm sorry," Olivia said softly. "About your father. I'm sorry about yours." She looked up sharply. "Choi Eun-ji mentioned it when I asked about your file," he admitted. "I hope that doesn't feel like an invasion." "It's strange," she said. "Having someone this powerful knows something personal about me. I know what it is to lose someone before you're ready to run a life without them." His voice dropped lower, rougher at the edges. "It doesn't feel like power. It feels like the loneliest thing in the world, most days." For the first time since she'd met him, Olivia saw something underneath the composure. Not the billionaire, not the CEO, just a man who had learned very early that grief and responsibility arrive at exactly the same time, and neither one waits for the other to finish. "You laughed," she said suddenly, "at the match, before the kiss. I remember it because I'd never seen a stranger laugh like that, like nothing else in the world existed." "I don't laugh like that anymore," he admitted. "Not since." "You did tonight, a minute ago, when I said this was my table." He looked at her for a long moment, and something passed between them that neither one dared to name out loud. "Careful," he said quietly. "You're going to make me forget every reason this is complicated." "Is it complicated?" "You have no idea." Neither of them moved to close the distance between them, but neither of them moved away either, and when the lights flickered back on 20 minutes later, both of them startled, like they'd been caught somewhere they weren't supposed to be. The next morning, Olivia arrived early and found Jung-hoon already waiting near the executive elevator, a cup of coffee in each hand. He offered her one without a word. She didn't take it. "We can't do this," she said quietly, before she lost her nerve. "Last night, whatever that was, I have a family depending on my paycheck, and you have a company depending on your reputation. If anyone saw us in that room, no one saw us. You don't know that." Her voice cracked slightly. "I've spent my whole life making sure nobody ever had a reason to say my name in the wrong sentence. I can't let one dark room undo that." Jung-hoon set both cups down on the ledge beside them, giving her his full attention. "I'm not asking you to risk anything you haven't already decided to risk. I'm only telling you that I haven't felt like myself in years, and last night, for 20 minutes, I did." "That's not fair." "No," he agreed. "It isn't. Fair would be meeting you anywhere else, as anyone else. I don't get to choose that. Neither do you now." He picked the coffee back up and held it toward her again. "But I can promise you this much. Whatever happens next, you will never lose anything for the crime of being honest with me." She took the coffee, finally, her fingers brushing his for the briefest second. "I'm still scared," she admitted. "So am I," he said. "I'm simply better at hiding it. It's the one advantage of practicing for 34 years. That small, unexpected honesty did more to steady her than any promise could have." What neither of them saw was the figure standing near the stairwell door, phone raised, capturing 3 photographs of the CEO and a junior employee sitting alone together in a darkened conference room long after everyone else had gone home. Rumors moved through the company the way smoke moves through a closed room, impossible to see clearly, impossible to avoid breathing in. By the end of the week, half the marketing floor believed Olivia had used the stadium encounter deliberately, engineering her way into the founder's attention. The other half simply resented her for the funded initiative, the boardroom approval, the sudden visibility she hadn't asked for and couldn't undo. Na Hae-rin fed both halves quietly, carefully, never saying anything that could be traced directly back to her, but always somewhere nearby when a new rumor took its first breath. "I heard she followed him to the match on purpose," one coworker whispered near the coffee station. "I heard he's already changed her reporting line twice," said another. Olivia said nothing. She kept her head down and her work spotless, because spotless work was the only shield she had ever been given, and she intended to use it until it broke. The confrontation came sooner than she expected. Na Hae-rin cornered her in the supply room on a Tuesday afternoon. voice pitched low enough not to carry, sharp enough to cut regardless. "I built the framework for that initiative," she said. 6 months of research, 3 failed pitches to the old board. You walked in, repackaged it, and walked out with his personal attention. Do you understand how that looks? "I didn't ask for his attention," Olivia said carefully. "I asked for approval on work I did myself." "Nobody gets approval this fast on their own." Nahirin's eyes narrowed. "Not unless something else is buying it for them. If you have a problem with my work, take it to Mr. CO directly. I have nothing to hide." "Don't you?" The question landed heavier than Olivia expected, and she watched Nahirin's gaze flick, just briefly, toward the executive floor, before the woman turned and walked away without waiting for an answer. That night, Olivia sat across from Amina at their kitchen table, turning a cup of tea in slow circles without drinking it. "She knows something," Olivia said, "or she suspects it. I don't know which is worse." "Does it matter?" Amina asked. "You haven't done anything wrong." "It matters if the story gets told before I get to tell it myself." Olivia set the cup down. "You know how this works, Amina. Nobody asks a woman like me what actually happened. They just decide what's more interesting." Amina reached across the table and took her hand. "Then stop waiting for someone else to decide it. What do you actually want, Olivia? Not what's safe, not what protects the paycheck. What do you want?" Olivia didn't answer right away. She thought of the emergency lights, the storm outside, the way his voice had dropped low enough that it felt like it belonged only to her. "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but I know it isn't nothing." It broke on a Thursday morning. A journalist named Rachel Morgan, who covered a corporate scandal for one of the city's largest outlets, received an anonymous tip and 3 attached photographs. She stared at them for a long time before making a single phone call, not to her editor, but to a source she'd been cultivating for months inside the company's finance department, someone who had already been feeding her fragments about irregular vendor payments for nearly a year. "I've got photos of the CEO with a junior employee," she told the source. "Romance angle writes itself, but something about the timing bothers me. Who benefits from this leaking now? Ask who's been pushing hardest for the Song Alliance," the source said quietly. "Then ask who stands to lose the most if that alliance falls through." Rachel Morgan didn't publish anything that day. Instead, she pulled every vendor contract she could access through public filings and began cross-referencing signatures, patient in the particular way of someone who understood that the real story was rarely the one handed to her first. She stared at them for a long time before making a single phone call. The photographs found their way, within hours, to the desk of Lee Hyun-suk. He studied them with the calm satisfaction of a man who had just been handed a weapon he hadn't gone looking for, but wasn't about to waste. He had been quietly arranging a different future for Jung-hoon for over a year, a strategic marriage to the daughter of a director at one of the country's largest conglomerates, a union that would secure contracts, silence competitors, and, most usefully for Lee Hyun-suk, keep the company's leadership too entangled in family obligation to ever look too closely at where certain funds had gone. A junior employee with no family name and no shares to offer was not part of that plan. He picked up the photographs, walked them down the hallway, and placed them, without a word, directly onto the desk of the board's senior partner, timed perfectly for the emergency session scheduled the next morning. Olivia found out about the photographs 40 minutes before the board meeting began, when Choi Eun-ji pulled her aside in the hallway, her face pale. "You need to prepare yourself," Eun-ji said quietly. "Someone photographed you and Mr. Seo." The images are already in front of the board. Olivia felt the floor tilt beneath her. It isn't what it looks like, she whispered. It rarely is, Yoonji said gently. That's never stopped anyone from believing it anyway. Olivia stood frozen in the corridor, staring at the closed boardroom doors, knowing that everything she had built, the promotion, the initiative, the fragile respect she'd earned inch by exhausting inch, was about to be measured against 3 photographs taken in the dark by someone who had never once said her name to her face. If you've made it this far, you already know this story isn't finished breaking your heart yet. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment telling us what you think Olivia should do next. Because what happens behind those boardroom doors is about to change everything. The boardroom fell silent the moment the door opened. 12 executives sat around the table, the photographs spread across its center like evidence at a trial nobody had agreed to attend. Olivia stood near the entrance, spine straight, hands folded tightly in front of her, refusing to let them see her shake. Lee Hyun-suk rose first. "These images speak for themselves," he said, voice smooth, reasonable, the voice of a man who had rehearsed outrage until it sounded like concern. "A junior employee, alone with our founder, after hours, unsupervised. I don't need to explain what this looks like to shareholders, or to the family we've spent a year building trust with." Several board members murmured agreement. "She should be released from her position immediately," Lee Hyun-seok continued, "for the company's protection." Jung-hoon had not yet said a single word. He stood slowly, buttoning his jacket with unhurried precision, and walked to the head of the table, past the photographs, past Lee Hyun-suk's carefully arranged outrage, until he stood directly beside Olivia. "I was in that room," he said. "I chose to stay. I chose to sit down. If there is blame here, it belongs entirely to me, and I will not allow it to fall on someone who did nothing but her job exceptionally well." The room went utterly still. She made an honest mistake during a celebration months ago that had nothing to do with this company, he continued. "The only people who should feel any embarrassment in this room are the ones using a private, harmless conversation to destroy the career of a woman who has done more for this company in 6 weeks than some of you have done in 6 years. Lee Hyun-seok's composure cracked, just slightly. "Jung-hoon, I understand you feel I'm not finished." The room had never heard him raise his voice. He didn't raise it now. He simply let it drop lower, colder. The voice of a man who had spent his whole life being underestimated by people who mistook his quiet for weakness. "I've asked Han Ji-soo to review every vendor contract signed under this board's authority for the past 3 years, Jung-hoon said. Interestingly, several of them route payments through companies with no verifiable operations. All of them were signed off by the same signature. He looked directly at Lee Hyun-suk. "Yours." The color drained from Lee Hyun-suk's face. That's an outrageous accusation." "It isn't an accusation," Han Ji-soo said calmly, sliding a folder across the table. "It's a forensic audit. Ms. Morgan's newsroom has apparently been building a similar story for weeks, following an entirely unrelated tip about vendor irregularities. She reached out to our legal department for a comment 3 days ago. We've simply been quiet about what we already knew." Park Do-hyun cleared his throat. "I flagged 3 of those shell payments to the audit committee myself, 6 months ago. I was told the matter had been reviewed and closed." He looked directly at Lee Hyun-suk. "You reviewed it personally, if I recall." "I stand by every decision I've made for this company," Lee Hyun-suk snapped, but his voice had lost its earlier smoothness. "Then you won't object to Ms. Morgan publishing her findings alongside our own audit," Jung-hoon said. Transparency tends to be very persuasive. Rachel Morgan, it turned out, had followed the money long before she'd ever received a single photograph, and the photographs meant to destroy Olivia had instead handed the board the final piece of a much larger, much older betrayal. Baek Sung-ho, the head of security, appeared at the door before anyone summoned him, as though he'd been waiting for exactly this moment for longer than anyone realized. "Escort Mr. Lee to collect his belongings," Jung-hoon said quietly, under supervision. Security arrived at the door within minutes. Lee Hyun-suk did not resist. He simply stood, adjusted his jacket with the same practiced calm he had used to destroy other people for years, and walked out without another word, because there was nothing left that he could say that would matter. The proposed marriage alliance dissolved within the week, quietly, without scandal, once the director's family realized exactly what kind of man they had almost tied their daughter to. Olivia did not get to celebrate immediately. She stood in the boardroom long after everyone else had filed out, staring at the space where the photographs had been, feeling something between relief and grief she couldn't quite name. Choi Eun-ji found her there first, before Jung-hoon did, and simply wrapped an arm around her shoulders without a word. It was the kind of quiet, unasked-for comfort Olivia hadn't realized she needed until it arrived. "You didn't imagine any of it," Eun-ji said gently. "The doubt, the fear that none of this was real, or that it would be taken from you the moment it mattered. That's not a weakness, Olivia. That's what happens to people who've had to fight for everything they've ever kept." "I keep waiting for the part where it falls apart," Olivia admitted. "Maybe it already tried to," Eun-ji said. "And maybe it didn't win." Jung-hoon stayed with her. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "You could have let them push me out and stayed comfortable." "I've been comfortable my entire life," he said. "It's the least interesting thing about me." She almost laughed, and then almost cried, and settled for something in between. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," he said, "we find out if two people can build something honest, in a place that's spent years rewarding everything except honesty." Weeks passed, and the company exhaled. Olivia's initiative launched in 3 cities before the season ended, and the first photographs to circulate about it were the ones the company had actually intended: children in new uniforms, running drills on freshly resodded fields, coaches who showed up because someone had finally paid them enough to make showing up sustainable. At the first field opening, a small girl, no older than 9, tugged on Olivia's sleeve and asked if she was the one who had gotten them new cleats. Olivia crouched down to her level and told her the truth, that a lot of people had worked hard to make it happen, but that the running and the winning would always belong to her alone. The girl grinned, missing 2 front teeth, and sprinted back onto the field like the conversation had already been forgotten, the way only children can forget the things that matter most to the adults watching them. Olivia stood at the edge of that field for a long time after the ceremony ended, thinking about her father, and the coaches who'd shown up for her when money was short, and the version of herself who never could have imagined standing here, in this role, having built something that would outlast every rumor that had tried to unmake her. Her promotion came without ceremony, buried in an email from Choi Eun-ji that Olivia read 3 times just to be sure it was real. She and Jung-hoon did not rush anything. There were quiet dinners that stretched long past dessert. There were nights Taehyun and Amina ended up at the same table, bickering about football rivalries neither of them understood well enough to actually argue about. One evening, Jung-hoon flew with Olivia to see her mother. He arrived without security, without an entourage, carrying a small box of pastries because Ethan had mentioned Miriam had a weakness for them. Miriam studied him for a long moment on the doorstep, the way mothers study anyone claiming to matter to their daughters. "So, you're the billionaire," she said finally. "I'm Jung-hoon," he corrected gently. "The rest is just a job." Something in Miriam's expression softened. David would have liked that answer. She stepped aside to let him in. He never trusted a man who led with his title. Later, watching Jung-hoon laugh at something Ethan said at the dinner table, an easy, unguarded laugh, nothing like the composed calm he wore at the office, Olivia felt something settle in her chest that she hadn't let herself feel since her father died, the sense that her family's table had room for one more chair, and it fit. There was a slow, deliberate unlearning of guardedness on his part, and a slow, deliberate unlearning of disbelief on hers, both of them relearning, in small pieces, that safety and happiness were allowed to exist in the same sentence. The company's annual charity gala fell 3 months after Lee Hyun-suk's departure, and for the first time, Olivia attended not as an anonymous new hire hiding near the back wall, but as the director of an initiative now expanding into a 4th city. She wore deep emeralds, and when Jung-hoon crossed the room to greet her, he did it the way he greeted every other executive in the room. A handshake, a few measured words, nothing that would give the board or the cameras anything new to whisper about. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt strange, standing 3 careful feet apart from someone whose hand she'd been holding under a restaurant table the night before. "This is what discretion looks like," he murmured later, finding her near the terrace doors when the crowd had thinned. "I know it isn't comfortable." "It's fine," she said, and meant it, mostly. "I understand why it has to be this way. For now." "For now," he agreed. "Not forever." He didn't reach for her hand. Not there, not with half the board still circulating behind them. But he stood close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, watching the same skyline he'd built half of, and for a moment, neither of them needed anything more than that. "Choi Eun-ji told me the board is drafting a formal relationship disclosure policy," Olivia said. "Apparently we're the reason it didn't exist before." "We tend to have that effect," he said, almost smiling, "causing policy where there used to be none." "Is that a complaint?" "It's a compliment. Most people in this building follow rules because they're told to. You made an entire boardroom rewrite theirs because they finally had a reason worth writing them for. Then, on a bright afternoon months later, the company sponsored another match at the same stadium where it had all begun. Olivia and Jung-hoon sat together this time, not hidden among strangers, not separated by security or circumstance, just 2 people sharing a single row of seats while 80,000 voices rose around them. An elderly stadium steward moved slowly along the aisle, checking tickets out of habit more than necessity. Olivia recognized him instantly. "You were here," she said. "The night of the celebration. You saw everything, didn't you, Mr. Ko?" The old man, Ko Jin-soo, smiled the particular smile of someone who had spent 40 years watching strangers fall in and out of love in the same 80,000 seats. "I see a great many things," he said. "Most people never let themselves feel them twice." He moved on before either of them could ask what he meant. The match reached its final minutes, tension climbing with every pass of the ball, until a dramatic goal sent the entire stadium into a roar loud enough to shake the seats beneath them. Olivia laughed, threw her arms up instinctively, then caught herself and quickly folded them back down, glancing sideways. "No accidental celebrations today," she said, cheeks warm. Jung-hoon smiled. The real one, the one she'd only seen a handful of times, the one that reached all the way to his eyes. "I wasn't worried." "Why not?" "Because "If you ever kissed me again," he said, voice low enough that only she could hear it beneath the noise, "I'd know it wasn't an accident." She blushed and looked away, and neither of them noticed the crowd anymore, or the noise, or the cameras, or anything except the small, steady space between them that had somehow, against every reasonable calculation either of them had ever made, become the safest place either of them knew. Somewhere behind them, Mr. Ko Jin-soo paused at the top of the stairs, watching the two of them for a moment longer than his job required, and murmured quietly to himself, the words lost beneath 80,000 cheering voices. "Some meetings aren't accidents," he said. "They're answers to prayers people forgot they made." Neither Olivia nor Jung-hoon heard him. Miles away, in an office stripped of his name from the door but not yet emptied of his ambition, Lee Hyun-suk sat alone in the dark, staring at a single unopened envelope from Director Song's family. One final offer, quietly renewed, waiting for an answer he hadn't given up on receiving. He smiled, faintly, and picked up his phone. But if this story made you feel something tonight, don't let it end here. Like this video, subscribe for more, and tell us in the comments which moment hit you the hardest. Because Olivia and Jung-hoon's story is far from over, and you will not want to miss what is waiting for you.